The courtroom was tense the moment Judge Amy Barrett took her seat. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, and every eye turned toward Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who stood calmly at the defense table. Barrett's reputation for being unyielding was well known, and today she seemed determined to make an example out of Crockett. With a sharp tone, Barrett began questioning her authority, her experience, and even her motives for being present. "Ms. Crockett," Barrett said, her voice cutting through the silence, "your arguments today are nothing more than theatrics. You're wasting this court's time, and I will not allow this chamber to become a political stage." The words struck like a gavel, but Crockett didn't flinch. She simply folded her hands, lifted her chin, and met Barrett's stare with steady composure. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, sensing that something was about to shift. "Your Honor," Jasmine replied, her voice firm yet calm, "if defending the truth and standing up for the law is theatrics, then perhaps this court has forgotten its true purpose." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The confrontation had only just begun, but everyone could feel it. Crockett wasn't going to bow to Barrett's intimidation. Judge Barrett's eyes narrowed, the faintest hint of irritation flickering across her face. She leaned forward, voice dripping with authority. "Congresswoman, you are not here to lecture this court. You are here to respond to the charges laid before you. If you cannot keep your emotions in check, I will silence you." The words echoed through the chamber, and for a moment, it seemed as though the gavel of final judgment had already fallen. Reporters scribbled furiously, anticipating a collapse from Crockett under the weight of judicial power. But Jasmine Crockett didn't falter. Instead, she took a deliberate step forward, her voice rising with controlled passion. "With respect, Your Honor, silencing the truth will not make it disappear. I stand here not only for myself but for the people who expect justice to be fair, transparent, and free from personal bias." The audience stirred. A few gasps, a few nods. Crockett had struck a nerve. Barrett raised her gavel as if to slam it down, but hesitated. Jasmine's words had already pierced through the tension, and the balance of the room was beginning to shift. For the first time that morning, Judge Barrett seemed momentarily unsettled. Judge Barrett straightened in her chair, forcing her composure back into place. "This is not a campaign rally, Ms. Crockett. You will stick to the facts, or I will strike your words from the record." Jasmine took a breath, then smiled faintly, a smile that wasn't defiance, but confidence. She reached into her file, holding up a document for the court to see. "Then let's talk about facts, Your Honor. Here is the evidence you tried to dismiss earlier, evidence that proves this case was built on shaky ground from the start." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Reporters lifted their cameras higher, capturing every second. Judge Barrett's lips tightened as she realized the Congresswoman wasn't only standing firm, she was exposing cracks in the entire proceeding. Jasmine's voice sharpened like steel. "This isn't about me wasting the court's time. This is about a system that too often tries to intimidate those who won't bow to power. I won't be silenced, not here, not today." Her words cut through the chamber like thunder. Even the bailiff shifted uneasily, as if unsure whether to brace for chaos or history. Judge Barrett's gavel hovered in the air, but she didn't bring it down. For the first time, she was no longer in full control of the courtroom. Judge Barrett's tone grew sharper, her words aimed like arrows. "Congresswoman, you are dangerously close to contempt. This court will not tolerate grandstanding, no matter who you are." The threat hung heavy in the air. The gallery went silent, so silent that the creak of someone shifting in their chair could be heard. It seemed as though Barrett was preparing to strike the final blow. But Jasmine Crockett didn't back down. She placed the document on the podium, her voice steady yet fiery. "Contempt of court, Your Honor, is when truth is buried under arrogance. Contempt is when evidence is ignored because it inconveniences those in power. I will not apologize for bringing the truth into this courtroom." The audience stirred again, louder this time. Some clapped their hands against their knees, others exchanged wide-eyed looks. The tide was shifting. Crockett's words were no longer just a defense, they were an indictment of the very imbalance playing out in front of them. Barrett gripped the gavel tightly, but for every ounce of force she tried to project, Jasmine's calm defiance struck harder. The judge's authority was still intact, but her dominance was cracking with each word Crockett spoke. At that moment, it wasn't just a legal battle, it was a fight for the soul of justice itself. The gavel trembled slightly in Judge Barrett's grip, though she tried to mask it with a cold stare. "You are out of line, Congresswoman. One more outburst, and I will remove you from this courtroom." Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her tone calm but blazing with conviction. "Remove me if you must, Your Honor. But understand this, every reporter, every citizen watching today will know exactly why. Because when faced with the truth, this court chose silence over accountability." The room erupted in a low roar. Reporters nearly leapt from their seats, pens scratching wildly as cameras flashed non-stop. The threat of removal now sounded less like justice and more like desperation. Crockett continued, her voice carrying with electrifying clarity, "This courtroom does not belong to intimidation. It belongs to justice. And justice requires truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is for those in power." Judge Barrett froze, the gavel still raised but her authority slipping through her fingers like sand. For the first time, she wasn't the one commanding the courtroom, Jasmine Crockett was. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't weakness, it was the sound of a crowd realizing history was unfolding before them. Judge Barrett's face hardened. She lowered the gavel slowly, her voice now colder, sharper. "Congresswoman Crockett, this is not a stage for your speeches. You claim to fight for justice, yet you twist this proceeding into a performance. Do you truly believe you are above the authority of this court?" The question cut through the air like a blade. The judge was baiting her, trying to corner Crockett into either submission or arrogance. All eyes locked on Jasmine, waiting to see if she would stumble. But Crockett didn't falter. She stood taller, her voice rising with unshakable fire. "Above this court? No. I respect this court too much to let it be misused. Authority does not mean immunity from the truth. If defending honesty and integrity looks like defiance, then I'll wear that label proudly." The crowd murmured louder now, energy pulsing through the chamber like electricity. Even those who entered skeptical of Crockett found themselves leaning toward her words. Jasmine pointed gently at the evidence on the podium. "This isn't theater, Your Honor. This is reality. And reality is not afraid of power, it exposes it." The cameras zoomed in as Judge Barrett's jaw tightened. She had tried to intimidate, to threaten, to silence, but Crockett's fiery reply was turning each tactic against her. The balance of power had shifted completely. The tension was suffocating. Judge Barrett gripped the edge of her bench, as if holding on to what little control she had left. Her voice cracked slightly, though she tried to disguise it with authority. "Congresswoman Crockett, your words may play well to the gallery, but they do not change the fact that this court will have the final say." Jasmine paused, letting the weight of silence work in her favor. Then, with deliberate calm, she spoke the line that would later replay on every news network, headline, and social feed. "No, Your Honor," she said, her eyes locked on Barrett, "the final say will always belong to the truth, and today, the truth is not on your side." The chamber erupted. Gasps filled the room, some in awe, others in disbelief. A few reporters even whispered, "Did she really just say that?" Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the judge's frozen expression. Barrett opened her mouth as if to retort, but no words came. For a judge who thrived on control, the silence spoke louder than any ruling. Crockett's fiery reply had not only pierced through Barrett's intimidation, it had redefined the entire battle. At that moment, she wasn't just defending herself. She was standing as the embodiment of defiance against unchecked power. And the world was watching. Judge Barrett's composure wavered as the echoes of Jasmine's words settled over the courtroom. She straightened in her chair, forcing her voice into a tone of authority once more. "Congresswoman Crockett, I will remind you again, this court is not a platform for speeches. You risk undermining your own credibility. But the warning landed flat. The reporters weren't scribbling about Crockett's credibility. They were capturing the spectacle of a judge scrambling to regain control. Jasmine allowed a moment of silence before answering, her tone sharp but measured. Credibility is not given by a gavel, Your Honor. It's earned through consistency, fairness, and truth. And right now, the people watching this trial can see exactly who's clinging to power instead of standing on principle. A ripple of applause broke out in the gallery before the bailiff barked for silence. Cameras zoomed in, catching Barrett's tightening jaw and Crockett's steady gaze. The contrast between them was undeniable, one clinging, the other unshakable. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping just enough to command attention. You may sit higher on the bench, Your Honor, but the truth stands taller than both of us. The words landed like a hammer. The audience was spellbound. Even Barrett's staunchest supporters in the room looked shaken. For the first time, it was clear, Judge Barrett wasn't leading this trial anymore. Jasmine Crockett was. Judge Barrett's patience snapped. She slammed the gavel down, the crack echoing like thunder. Enough. This court will not be turned into a circus. Congresswoman Crockett, if you continue this behavior, I will hold you in contempt and have you escorted out immediately. The threat rang through the chamber like a final ultimatum. The crowd stiffened, waiting to see if Jasmine would finally retreat. Even some reporters held their breath, wondering if this was the end of her fiery defiance. But Crockett didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the podium, her voice clear and unshaken. Hold me in contempt if you wish, Your Honor. But understand this, removing me will not erase the truth I've put on record today. It will only prove that this court is more afraid of accountability than of injustice. The audience erupted, half in applause, half in stunned silence. Barrett's gavel struck again and again, but it did nothing to drown out the wave of support that filled the room. Jasmine locked eyes with the judge and delivered the line that sealed the moment. You can silence my voice in this courtroom, but you cannot silence the truth outside of it. And the world is listening right now. Barrett froze, her gavel midair. She had threatened, shouted, and demanded, but in that instant, she realized she had lost. The courtroom was no longer hers to command. It belonged to Jasmine Crockett. The gavel hung useless in Judge Barrett's hand as the noise of the gallery swelled. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed non-stop, and even court officials looked unsure of what to do next. The authority of the bench had collapsed under the weight of Crockett's words. Barrett tried to steady her voice, but the crack in her tone betrayed her. Order, this court will have order, she barked, striking the gavel again. Yet the sound no longer carried authority, it sounded hollow, desperate. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm words cut through the chaos like a blade. The truth does not need order to exist, Your Honor. It needs courage. And today, that courage has spoken for itself. The room went silent again, but this time not from fear. It was the silence of awe, of realization. Every person present understood they had witnessed a power shift that would ripple far beyond the four walls of that courtroom. A reporter near the front whispered to a colleague, "This isn't just a trial anymore, it's history." Judge Barrett leaned back in her chair, visibly rattled, her authority in tatters. Crockett stood firm, her presence commanding, her voice unshaken. What was meant to be a crushing blow to Jasmine Crockett had instead become the moment she defined herself as unbreakable. And outside the courthouse, the world was already waiting to hear what she had said. The moment Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the courtroom, the scene was chaos. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust into her face, cameras flashing so rapidly it looked like lightning. The words she had spoken inside had already spread like wildfire, and the world was desperate to hear more. One journalist shouted over the noise, "Congresswoman, do you believe Judge Barrett's credibility is finished after today's exchange?" Jasmine paused at the top of the courthouse steps, lifting her chin as the crowd pressed closer. Her voice carried with calm authority. This was never about destroying a judge's credibility. It was about protecting the credibility of justice itself. When the truth is threatened, silence is not an option. The crowd roared with approval. Clips of her words were broadcast live, already trending across networks and social media. Supporters online were calling her fearless, while critics scrambled to spin the narrative, but no one could deny that she had shifted the balance of the conversation. Inside, Judge Barrett remained seated at the bench, staring into the empty chamber, realizing that her attempt to crush Crockett had backfired spectacularly. Instead of weakening her, Barrett had given Jasmine the stage to prove her resilience to the entire nation. By the time Crockett reached her car, chants of her name were echoing through the streets. She didn't just win in court that day, she had ignited a movement. By evening, the fallout was undeniable. News outlets replayed the confrontation on a loop, each headline more dramatic than the last. Crockett defies Barrett in courtroom showdown, truth echoes louder than the gavel, *, a star is born in the halls of justice. *. Political figures wasted no time weighing in. Allies of Crockett praised her as fearless, a voice of accountability who dared to say what others only whispered. She didn't just defend herself, one senator remarked on live television, she defended the very foundation of justice. But her critics fumed, calling her performance disrespectful and accusing her of undermining judicial authority. One pundit sneered, she turned a courtroom into a political theater. Yet even their outrage only fueled the spotlight shining on Crockett, because the more they tried to frame her as reckless, the more her fiery composure stood in contrast to Barrett's unraveling. On social media, clips of Jasmine's line, *, the final say will always belong to the truth, *, had gone viral, spreading far beyond politics. It was being quoted by students, activists, and even celebrities who rarely weighed in on legal debates. Meanwhile, Judge Barrett found herself under scrutiny, her conduct being dissected by legal experts. Was her attempt to silence Crockett an overreach? Had she exposed her own bias? The questions grew louder with each passing hour. What was meant to be Crockett's downfall had become her rise. And the storm was only beginning. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett appeared on national television. She sat poised, the clip of her courtroom exchange still replaying in the corner of the screen. The host leaned in, eager to ask the question on everyone's mind. Congresswoman Crockett, do you realize that your words yesterday have become a rallying cry across the country? People are quoting you everywhere, students, workers, even celebrities. Did you expect this reaction? Jasmine smiled faintly, calm but resolute. I didn't set out to create a rallying cry. I set out to defend the truth. But if my words inspire people to demand fairness, then I welcome it. Because justice doesn't live in courtrooms alone, it lives in the people willing to defend it. The studio audience broke into applause. Clips of her answer went viral instantly, reinforcing her image not just as a fiery defender, but as a leader unafraid to confront power head-on. Meanwhile, Judge Barrett remained silent. Her office issued no statements, and her allies in the legal world were struggling to defend her performance. Every attempt to downplay the moment only amplified Crockett's strength in contrast. Commentators across networks agreed on one thing: this was no longer just about a courtroom battle. Jasmine Crockett had transformed herself into a national symbol of courage under pressure. And with the nation watching, she knew exactly how to use this momentum. A week later, the courthouse showdown was still dominating headlines. Crowds gathered outside town halls and campuses holding signs with Crockett's words, *, the truth stands taller than power. What began as a heated exchange in court had transformed into a movement. Jasmine Crockett took the stage at a public rally, the crowd stretching as far as the cameras could see. The energy was electric, every chant of her name echoing like thunder. She raised her hand for silence, and the audience quieted instantly, waiting. Her voice rang out, steady and powerful. When I stood in that courtroom, I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for every person who has ever felt silenced by power, dismissed by authority, or ignored when they spoke the truth. That day proved something important. Courage in the face of intimidation can change everything. The crowd erupted, but she pressed on, her words slicing through the roar. The gavel may control a room, but it cannot control the truth. And if we stand together, unafraid, unshaken, and unbreakable, then no court, no office, no title can crush justice. The applause thundered so loudly that even the microphones crackled. People were in tears, holding up signs, chanting her name in unison. Somewhere, Judge Barrett surely watched the broadcast, realizing the confrontation she had started had elevated Crockett into something larger than an opponent. It had made her an icon. Jasmine stepped back from the podium, her face calm but fierce. She had walked into a courtroom under attack, and walked out having changed the conversation for the entire nation. It was not just a victory. It was history.